I'll be voting no for that reason.
No on Amendment 4.
For that reason, because it's a radical, and when you talk about radical, having a baby, abortion, doing an abortion in the 9th month is unacceptable to anybody. There's something in between, but the 6 is too short. It's just too short a period, and the 9 months is unacceptable. But for that reason, for the radicalization on the Democrat side, we're voting no.
Former president now vowing to vote against Florida's controversial abortion rights amendment this fall. His stance on reproductive rights continues to evolve during this campaign. For their part, the Harris campaign responded to Trump's reversal on the Florida measure by launching a Fighting for Reproductive Freedom bus tour that includes several swing state stops. And new polling out this morning shows just how tight this race is in 6 of our swing states. Some good news in here for Kamala Harris in Wisconsin and Michigan, and equally good news for Donald Trump in Arizona. But in 3 other key battleground states, Nevada, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, this race is basically a dead heat. Also making news today, we get a glimpse of what swing state voters think about a range of issues around reproductive rights, thanks to a new survey from the University of Maryland. Dr. Stephen Kull is the director of the program for public consultation at Maryland School of Public Policy. Stephen, good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get to some specific swing states that you surveyed, what's the biggest headline from your findings?
I think the biggest finding is that there's a remarkable amount of common ground between Republicans and Democrats about what should be done about abortion, primarily on the question of whether abortion should be criminalized before fetal viability. And we find that large majorities of both Republicans and Democrats in all of the 6 swing states that we polled oppose criminalization.
And Stephen, after Roe v. Wade was overturned, there's still a debate about making abortion federal law or leaving it up to the states. What can you tell us about your findings on that? Where are people?
Yeah, that was striking. There was also consensus on this issue that it should be a federal law. And that was irrespective of how people felt about what the law should be. The consensus was that it should be federal, not decided by the states.
And you also surveyed swing state voters on things like mandatory ultrasounds and waiting periods as requirements for getting an abortion. What did you find there?
Yeah, that is an area where there's division. Republicans go one way and Democrats go the other across all of those swing states. A slight majority opposes both requirements for ultrasound and the waiting period, but it's a slight majority. And so this is the area where you see the division coming out.
And birth control was a big part of the survey as well. What were some of the top line findings there?
Yeah, that was, again, another area where there's big consensus, very strong support for assuring access to birth control through education, requiring it through healthcare insurance and so on, providing subsidies to make sure that people with low and middle income have access to birth control. Right. The message is, the government shouldn't really criminalize, but they should try to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. Yeah,
I think if you tuned into cable news, you'd think that we're very divided on this issue and that both parties are sort of toward the edges of their extremes, when most majorities, poll after poll, we find most Americans and a majority of Americans are in the middle on this issue. Were you surprised at how much bipartisan support there was among specifically these swing state voters, the voters both campaigns need to win this election?
Yeah, well, it is very striking. In the work that we've done, we've actually tend to find that there's more common ground than people assume. In our work, we found over 200 positions where there is a bipartisan common ground. So that the voices that get out front are often in the more extreme positions, and it creates the impression that they are representative of the population. Yeah. But there is actually points of convergence, and there are some points of difference, such as on the question of federal funding or the height of it.
This is all really good to know, good to keep in mind, good to remind our viewers that we're not as divided as it may seem sometimes. Dr. Stephen Kull from the Program for Public Consultation at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Thanks so much for sharing your findings with us.
Thanks for having me.
Worth noting, this survey did not include North Carolina, but that's where we head next, because abortion is now front and center in the governor's race there. But first, swing state voters on the issue of reproductive rights. Battleground will be right back.
Well, the reproductive rights obviously is something that's being aimed as a result of the whole freedom of religion, as far as I'm concerned, the theocracy in my democracy, so to speak.
I'm sure no one has ever gotten an abortion and said, oh, that was a piece of cake.
My son went and had a vasectomy.
Really?
He was 25, and when they overturned Roe versus Wade, he went and had a vasectomy because he said he never wanted to put a woman in a position that she would have to make that terrible, terrible choice.